And Dan Roberts, and we also have Cory Johnson, the Chief Market Strategist of Ripple, joining the show today. Cory, thank you so much for joining us here.
Glad to have you on.
So we'll talk about the recent volatility that we've seen in the crypto markets, what we were just talking to Keith about here in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about the recent transition you made. You were in media for years. Yep. You recently just made the jump to crypto. You're now with Ripple. Talk to us, what was behind the move? What was behind the career change?
Well, I mean, so fundamentally from a personal career standpoint, I started to look at my career as having done a lot of startups. So, I worked on Wall Street, worked on the buy side for a couple of hedge funds for a stretch. But in the media side, I started a Slam magazine. I helped start Vibe magazine with Quincy Jones. We helped start TheStreet.com with Jim Cramer. We did a magazine called The Industry Standard. I was the first Silicon Valley bureau chief for CNBC. That was kind of a startup in its own way. When I went to the buy side, I never thought I'd go back to journalism, but then came to Bloomberg with an idea about a different kind of technology show. That was a startup. So I've got startups in my blood. I like to do it. And the other thing is I've seen high-growth startups in Silicon Valley for 20 years. I've watched these companies. Some have done wonderfully and spectacularly. I've watched companies like Google go from two guys to one of the dominant businesses in the history of time. I've watched a lot of companies faceplant in that time. And so the idea that I can be involved at a very senior level to help shape a company that's doing some things that have really captivated the imagination of everyone in the world of business is really exciting. So I'm stoked.
Cory, you talk about Ripple as a startup. There is some massaging to be done, I'll say, on the messaging. We were lucky enough to have Ripple CEO Brad Garlinghouse in here at our all-day crypto event about a month ago. And he was very candidly talking about sort of the confusion in the market that exists between Ripple, the company, and its many different products, and XRP, the cryptocurrency.
Right.
So as market strategist, is that something you'll be looking at? How do you it takes a little bit of educating people on the differences.
I mean, certainly, I've been telling stories, non-fiction stories for my entire life. So I would imagine that's going to be a part of my role, both internally at the company and externally, sort of facing Wall Street and facing investors in the company and indeed facing regulators and I would imagine part of the sales effort as well. Telling that story clearly. Ripple's a really interesting company. I mean, as your last guest was, I thought, actually really well, explained it very well. There's two things, right? There's these cryptocurrencies. We call it digital asset. You call them coins, whatever the heck you want to call it. And then there's a software product that Ripple is creating. And the history of this company is that some very smart engineers looked at Bitcoin and said, there's some flaws in this. This thing might not scale well. This thing might not allow for it to be used in commerce the way some of the people behind Bitcoin wishes that it would. Let's try to improve that. Well, they created this really cool and interesting technology, this XRP, this coin, if you will, this digital asset. But then what? Well, they turned that over, or much of that, about 2/3 of that, over to a company, Ripple, and let Ripple try to find the right use case. And we're focused really on banking and moving money the way we move text messages. I mean, the fact that you can send a text message to Brazil in 3 seconds, and that you can send an email with an attachment to South Africa in about 3 seconds, but it takes you 3 to 6 days to move money, is ridiculous. It's an enormous problem in the world of finance. And Ripple software is trying to solve these problems, incorporating XRP as a coin or as a digital asset as a methodology to solve those problems, so that using Ripple software you can move money in 3 seconds like a text message. It shouldn't be rocket science, but thus far the world of banking hasn't been able to solve that technological problem. We think we have.
Yeah, Bitcoin, of course, originally people hyped it as a way to disrupt Western Union, as you say, a way to send money, and it was good for remittances. Of course, Bitcoin itself, it hasn't shaken out that way. It's mostly just a speculative investment. People aren't really using it as a cryptocurrency anymore. Brad Garlinghouse said the same thing that you were saying about how we think of it more as a digital asset than a cryptocurrency. I think the term cryptocurrency has become a little passé. But when you think of Ripple, is it a crypto company? Is it a banking company? Who are Ripple's biggest competitors, you think?
So I truly think of it as an enterprise software company. It's an enterprise software company trying to solve issues around payments for banks and eventually for companies as well. We've got products to do both those things. But it also is sitting on an asset of about 61 billion XRP assets. And so the valuation of this business, it's a private company, of course, but it certainly has both those components of the company itself is sitting on this enormous asset that right now the market is valuing at a very high level, but we're trying to use that asset to create a software business where we'll be charging enterprise software just like any other enterprise software out there, whether it's Salesforce or Oracle or SAP or you name it.
And Cory, in your new role, you're out there, you're explaining what Ripple is, you're explaining what XRP is. It's becoming more mainstream, but still there is a ways to go here. Does the recent volatility that we have seen in the crypto markets, does that make the adoption of it, do you think that will slow the adoption of it, or how does that change the message that you from Ripple are getting out there?
So let me make it really personal. So December, we see, even November, December, we see this huge spike in the value of a lot of these assets, and they're all seem to be moving together. There's been a lot of interest in this, and I've been paying attention to this space for quite a while, but I really dug in November, December, and just really decided to learn it. And from my perspective at the time, which is completely biased now, but even at the time, I saw that, what is and I'm a Buffett guy, right? I'm a what's the intrinsic value? What's the thing actually worth? The currency notion, gold always seemed like a ridiculous investment to me, right? Because it only has value because someone else has value. Ultimately, it's a greater fool theory notion, right? But the intrinsic value in these coins or in these assets isn't there. Right? It's just hoping someone else is going to find it there. Maybe it's a better way to use security. Maybe it's a better way to use technology. But what I saw in Ripple was something different than what I see in some of these other ones, and certainly a lot of these ICOs, is that the activities of the software company create value in the asset, an underlying intrinsic value. Now, the volatility of these things is because they're trading and because they're tradable assets, and certainly there's going to be volatility in the early days of any tradable asset, or extreme volatility. But I think one of the reasons you have that volatility is because no one's doing that. This is ultimately worth that. This is the price, or that is the price I'm willing to pay for this asset. And I think that over time we're going to see that. And I believe that Ripple is going to be able to demonstrate an intrinsic value for XRP that some of these sillier coins and assets don't have and won't have.
And Cory, I mean, over the past, or this week, it came out that Google had blocked crypto ads from its platform. That has added to some of the volatility that we have seen so far this week in the crypto market. What's your reaction to that? I mean, why would they be doing that?
Well, thank God. I mean, so many scams. And it wasn't just cryptos. It was options offerings that were sort of binary in nature. If we get this right, you'll make money. They banned that. Our society has a big problem with what's been happening in social media, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We see that with the Russian role in the U.S. elections and in global elections. We see that with the hate speech that's happened there. And I think that the platforms are starting to recognize that they need to have some sort of governance towards those messages. Regulation is going to be good for the world of blockchain companies, for cryptocurrencies, because it really is going to separate the wheat from the chaff. I don't think we're there yet, but I think it's I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, I agree with you here. Cory, we want you to stick around for this next story here and have you weigh in. We're going to move over to tech. Amazon HQ2. It's been the talk of the town for a while now. The list is down to 20 cities, and the cities are doing all they can to lure the tech giant here to their hometown. Some are even offering major economic incentives as part of their bids. There is a little problem, though, here. Other companies that are already located in these cities are demanding some of the same hefty tax breaks. Deanna, I'm going to throw this to you first. Is it still a good deal for cities if Amazon's second headquarters is located in their town?
No, it was never a good deal. I mean, we've seen it with some of their centers already right now, right, where they do the packaging and a lot of the prep work to get some of these things sold out. Cities are losing money because they essentially promise Amazon the world, no taxes. Well, in addition to that, we'll give you tax breaks. We'll throw on tax incentives. And these cities are, these centers are employing a number of people, but it's not offsetting the cost in any way. Amazon by itself, it does provide jobs, and it brings, it can revitalize an area or whatever, but it's not offsetting the huge tax break that these companies, or these cities, are offering to Amazon. And so as this battle heats up, Amazon, because these negotiations are private, are pitting cities against one another, saying, well, here's what Dallas offered us. Austin, what are you going to do? And that just creates an environment where Amazon can essentially demand the world, and they're probably going to get it.
And Cory, you've been tracking startups for many years. Amazon isn't a startup anymore, but you've been tracking Silicon Valley. Exactly. Have you seen anything like this before? I mean, all these cities coming together to bid for a second headquarters of a company?
Absolutely. Think about what happens with sports teams, right? Where you see the same thing, where you've got cities and municipalities deciding that they're going to throw vast fortunes in tax cuts towards these private businesses, in that case, to the benefit of the owners of NFL teams or basketball teams or whatever. the city planning function, I actually studied metropolitan studies right here at NYU, just down the block. I've spent a lot of time on this topic. The cities have to be smart about this, and they've got to really think about what their benefits are going to be. But the notion that technology jobs are somehow better than pre-technology jobs isn't true, and they've really got to consider what they're doing and why they want these kinds of businesses in their cities. I think it's interesting that this Wall Street Journal story that sort of prompted this discussion comes on the heels of the announcement that Toys R Us is shutting down, and a major employer and a major retailer that got destroyed really certainly through their own errors. There have been mistakes over decades at Toys R Us, fatal mistakes obviously, but also because of this competition from Amazon. So Amazon's going to be there in their cities, whether they have employees there or not. It's a smart company for a city to want, but you don't want to give away the farm to do it.
Well, just to play devil's advocate for a moment, I agree with all that, but I'm glad you mentioned sports teams. There is, if you ask certain people, certain economists, a sort of abstract benefit to having the NFL stadium, to having the baseball park, to having the team move to your city. We know that certain cities that don't have one of the big three sports leagues want a team to come, and it's because your city gets branded in a certain way. And I think we're seeing the same thing with Amazon. Yes, they are bending over backwards. Yes, they're giving up too much, you could say, but getting Amazon's HQ2 brings your city potentially into this new guard of, big American cities that are sexy to millennials, people who might be job seekers, tech job seekers. If you're Nashville, if you're Austin, it's clear why you want HQ2, and it's clear why they're willing to give these allowances. I mean, it's hard to put an economic impact on that. I mean, when you see NFL stadiums being built, there are always reports that come out. They say, oh, the economic impact will be X, and it's usually way overblown, usually not true. But there is arguably a sort of abstract brand benefit to getting it.
Well, last point is that Amazon has been brilliant about taxes as a core point of their strategy. There's no accident that Jeff Bezos, when he thought up the idea for Amazon living here in New York City, moved to Seattle, which has no state income tax, to start that business. Bill Gates did the same thing when he moved from New Mexico to the Seattle area to do that with that company. Also, the way the company doesn't generate earnings, right? Doesn't generate net income, but reinvest that money. They manage it. It also means they don't pay a lot in taxes, given how big they are in terms of revenues.
Or nothing in taxes, depending on how you add it up.
It is core to the way that Jeff Bezos thinks about that company, I think, is to be very tax efficient.
Yeah, it'll be very interesting to see which city actually ends up winning the second
Yeah,
headquarters.
what, you got in bets?
I don't know. I was pulling for my hometown of Philadelphia, but I think
not New Columbus.
I want not New York.
Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, Columbus, Ohio.
I'll go DC area because they're like 3 or 4 in the DC area. So I'm kind of cheating.
Dan,
well, as you know, my girlfriend lives in Connecticut, and for a while I was saying Hartford really could have benefited. I'm sure they're not in the running anymore, but I'd like to see Nashville get it.
Yeah. All right, we'll see. Cory Johnson, thank you so much for joining the show today. All right, guys.